What if I told you that a man once sold something that didn't exist for $250 million? Not a digital asset, not cryptocurrency, not even a piece of land, but an entire international airport that was never built, never planned, and existed only in his imagination. And the buyer? Not some naive individual, but one of Brazil's most respected banks, managed by a 14-year banking veteran who had never made a single questionable decision in his entire career. This isn't science fiction. This is the true story of how one Nigerian mastermind orchestrated the most audacious banking fraud in history, fooling international financial experts for 3 entire years while living like a king. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how he pulled off the impossible, and why his methods are still being used by scammers today. Buckle up, because this story will shatter everything you think you know about trust, greed, and the terrifying power of a perfectly executed lie. Before we dive into this incredible story, you need to understand the world of 1995. There was no Google to verify claims instantly. No social media to cross-reference identities. No smartphones to reverse search images. When someone called claiming to be a government official, verification meant making expensive international calls or sending faxes that could take hours to receive responses. Picture this scene. Sao Paulo, Brazil, 1995. The bustling financial district is alive with opportunity. Inside the offices of Banco Noroeste, one of Brazil's established financial institutions, the phone rings on what seems like an ordinary Tuesday morning. Nelson Sakaguchi, the bank's seasoned manager, picks up the receiver expecting a routine business call. Instead, he hears an authoritative voice with a slight Nigerian accent introducing himself as the governor of Nigeria's central bank, essentially the Alan Greenspan of an entire African nation. The caller's tone is professional, confident, and carries the weight of someone accustomed to moving millions with a single decision. "Mr. Sakaguchi," the voice continues, "I'm calling because your bank has come to our attention as a serious international player. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that could transform both our nations' futures." Sakaguchi's pulse quickens. Direct calls from central bank governors don't happen every day. This is the kind of opportunity that can define a career. But here's the twist that nobody, not Sakaguchi, not the banking regulators, not even the eventual investigators, saw coming. The voice on the other end of that phone wasn't Paul Aguma, Nigeria's actual central bank governor. It belonged to Emmanuel Nwude, a middle management employee at Union Bank of Nigeria, a small private institution with big dreams and an even bigger appetite for the impossible. But Emmanuel wasn't your typical fraudster dreaming up get-rich-quick schemes from his mother's basement. This was a man who understood the international banking world from the inside out. He had spent years studying how major financial institutions operated, how they made investment decisions, and most importantly, what psychological triggers would make seasoned professionals abandon their usual caution. Emmanuel had assembled what can only be described as a criminal dream team. 5 banking professionals who collectively possessed decades of experience in Nigerian finance. They knew every major player in the country's financial sector. They had connections that could provide legitimate government fax numbers, official letterheads, and insider information that would make their deception virtually undetectable. More than that, they understood human psychology at a level that would make behavioral economists envious. They knew that greed, when combined with fear of missing out and the validation of being chosen for an exclusive opportunity, could override even the most sophisticated risk management protocols. The opportunity Emmanuel painted was masterful in its believability. Nigeria had just declared Abuja as its new capital city in 1991. This was real, verifiable information that any banker could confirm. The government was indeed investing heavily in infrastructure to transform this planned city into a modern capital worthy of Africa's most populous nation. Mr. Sakaguchi, Emmanuel continued in that commanding voice, Nigeria is preparing to build a world-class international airport in Abuja. This isn't just any airport, we're talking about a transportation hub that will serve as the gateway between Africa and the Americas. The projected passenger volume will exceed 10 million annually within 5 years of opening. The numbers Emmanuel quoted weren't random. He had studied successful airport projects worldwide. He knew that major airports like Sao Paulo's own Guarulhos had cost similar amounts and generated enormous returns. His fictional project was ambitious but not impossibly so. The total investment required is $250 million, Emmanuel explained. We're approaching only the most sophisticated international banks, institutions with the vision to recognize a generational opportunity when they see one. But then came the psychological masterstroke that would seal Sakaguchi's fate. And because we value partnership over mere financing, we're offering the managing partner a substantial commission, $10 million as recognition for facilitating this transformative project. $10 million. For a bank manager earning perhaps $200,000 annually, this wasn't just money, it was life-changing wealth. Enough to secure his family's future for generations. What happened next reveals the terrifying power of expertly applied psychological manipulation. Emmanuel didn't pressure Sakaguchi for an immediate decision. Instead, he planted seeds of urgency and exclusivity. Of course, Mr. Sakaguchi, we're presenting this opportunity to several institutions worldwide. The Royal Bank of Canada has expressed strong interest, and we have meetings scheduled with Deutsche Bank next week. But your bank was our first choice because of your reputation for decisive action in emerging markets. Notice the psychology at work here. Social proof. Other prestigious banks are interested. Time pressure. Decisions need to be made quickly. Flattery. You were our first choice. A validation. Recognition of expertise in emerging markets. Sakaguchi found himself thinking about airports worldwide. He knew that major aviation hubs like London Heathrow or Singapore Changi were money-printing machines. An airport in a developing capital city with government backing and minimal competition could recoup its initial investment within 18 to 24 months and generate profits for decades. I'm very interested, Sakaguchi heard himself saying, but I'll need to see detailed plans, feasibility studies, government approvals. Naturally, Emmanuel replied smoothly. But given the sensitive nature of this project, we're dealing with national infrastructure security. After all, we prefer to handle documentation in person. Would you be available for a confidential meeting in London next week? Neutral territory, you understand. What happened in London represents one of the most elaborate confidence games in criminal history. Emmanuel's team didn't just prepare, they became their roles completely. They flew first class to London and checked into the Dorchester, one of the city's most exclusive hotels. Their suite alone cost more per night than most people earn in a month. When Sakaguchi's flight arrived at Heathrow, a Rolls-Royce limousine was waiting to collect him, complete with a uniformed chauffeur who addressed him as Sir, and knew exactly which hotel suite to deliver him to. Each member of Emmanuel's team had spent weeks perfecting their personas. Emmanuel, as the governor of Nigeria's central bank, he wore hand-tailored suits, carried himself with the authority of a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms, and spoke with the casual confidence of someone who routinely approved billion-dollar transactions. Team member number 2, the deputy governor responsible for international relations. His job was to provide technical details about Nigeria's economic policies and answer any questions about regulatory compliance. Team member number 3, the Director of Aviation Development in Nigeria's Ministry of Transportation. He carried detailed blueprints, environmental impact studies, and passenger traffic projections that had taken months to create. Team member number 4, the Chief Financial Officer of the project, armed with spreadsheets showing projected revenues, operating costs, and return on investment calculations that would make any banker's pulse race. Team member number 5, the Director of International Partnerships, whose role was to make Sakaguchi feel special, chosen, and part of an exclusive club of visionary investors. The documentation they presented was stunning in its authenticity. Official government letterheads, embossed seals, signatures that matched samples Sakaguchi could verify through diplomatic channels. Most impressive were the photographs. Emmanuel shaking hands with Nigeria's president, cutting ribbons at infrastructure ceremonies, addressing conferences of African finance ministers. Remember, this was 1995. These photographs couldn't be reverse searched on Google Images. They couldn't be run through deepfake detection software. If a photograph existed and looked professional, it was accepted as evidence. During their 3-day London meeting, Emmanuel's team revealed why they were criminal masterminds rather than mere fraudsters. Every question Sakaguchi asked had been anticipated and prepared for. Question: why choose a Brazilian bank rather than working with World Bank or IMF funding? Answer: Mr. Sakaguchi, you understand international development politics. World Bank funding comes with conditions that could delay this project for years. We need a partner who can move quickly and isn't bound by bureaucratic constraints. Your bank's success in Latin American infrastructure financing makes you the perfect partner. Question: what guarantees do we have that construction will actually begin? Answer: the Nigerian government has already allocated the land through presidential decree. Here's the documentation. We've also secured preliminary agreements with 3 major construction consortiums. But Mr. Sakaguchi, we must be honest. This project cannot wait for traditional financing timelines. If we cannot secure funding within the next 6 months, the government will reallocate this opportunity to other investors. Question: how can we verify the legitimacy of this project? Answer: we welcome verification, but we must be discreet. This project involves national security considerations. We can arrange for you to speak directly with our president's office, but such communications must be coordinated through official diplomatic channels to avoid compromising the project's confidentiality. Every answer was designed to make verification seem possible but impractical. Every response created new reasons why speed and discretion were essential. By the end of their London meeting, Sakaguchi was completely convinced he was sitting across from Nigeria's financial elite. But Emmanuel's final masterstroke was yet to come. Mr. Sakaguchi, our government is prepared to move forward with your bank as our preferred partner. However, given the scale of this undertaking, we need confirmation of your serious intent. A deposit of $3 million will secure your position and allow us to begin preliminary contractor agreements. $3 million as a deposit on a $250 million project seemed entirely reasonable. It represented just over 1% of the total investment, standard practice in major infrastructure deals. The deposit will be fully credited toward your final investment, Emmanuel assured him. And it demonstrates to our president and cabinet that we have secured a serious international partner. Here's where Emmanuel revealed his understanding of criminal psychology. Once Sakaguchi made that first payment, he would be psychologically committed to the project's success. Any doubts that arose later would be overwhelmed by the need to protect his initial investment. Sakaguchi authorized the $3 million transfer before leaving London. What happened next transforms this story from a simple fraud into a masterclass in psychological manipulation and financial engineering. Over the next 3 years, Emmanuel didn't just steal money, he created an entirely fictional reality that Sakaguchi lived inside. Every month, Sakaguchi received detailed progress reports. Photographs of land being cleared. Architectural renderings being refined. Environmental impact studies being completed. Government approval documents being processed through Nigeria's bureaucracy. The photographs were particularly convincing because they were real. Emmanuel had found construction sites throughout Nigeria and photographed them from angles that suggested airport development. The paperwork looked authentic because much of it was authentic, borrowed from actual infrastructure projects and modified with different names and dates. But the real genius was in how Emmanuel managed the money requests. He never asked for the full $250 million at once. Instead, he created a realistic timeline of payments that matched how actual construction projects are funded. Month 3, $5 million for final environmental clearances. Month 6, $8 million for preliminary site preparation. Month 9, $12 million for contractor deposits. Month 12, $15 million for equipment procurement. Month 18, $22 million for runway foundation work. Month 24, $28 million for terminal building construction. Month 30, $35 million for air traffic control systems. Each request was accompanied by documentation explaining exactly why the money was needed and providing proof of how previous payments had been used. Sakaguchi could see his investment transforming into a real infrastructure project, mile by mile, month by month. Here's where Emmanuel's banking background became crucial. He didn't just steal the money and disappear. He built a sophisticated financial system that would allow him to access the funds while avoiding detection. Working with 17 different banks across multiple countries, Emmanuel created a web of interconnected accounts that made tracking the money nearly impossible. A payment from Brazil to Nigeria might actually route through accounts in Switzerland, Hong Kong, the Cayman Islands, and London before reaching its final destination. Each transfer was structured to avoid triggering international banking reporting requirements. Amounts were kept under specific thresholds that would require additional documentation. Transfer purposes were disguised as legitimate business transactions. Consulting fees, equipment purchases, legal services. Most brilliantly, Emmanuel invested much of the stolen money in legitimate businesses. He purchased real estate in Nigeria, London, and New York. He bought shares in publicly traded companies. He established import-export businesses that generated genuine profits. This meant that even if investigators eventually tracked the money, they would find evidence of legitimate business activities rather than obvious fraud. Emmanuel wasn't just stealing, he was laundering money through real economic activity. Meanwhile, Sakaguchi had trapped himself in a psychological prison that Emmanuel had carefully constructed. The Brazilian banker couldn't reveal the project to his colleagues because of its confidential nature. He couldn't seek outside verification because of national security concerns. Most importantly, he couldn't stop making payments because of the sunk cost fallacy. He had already invested so much that walking away would mean accepting a total loss. Emmanuel regularly reinforced this psychological trap. Mr. Sakaguchi, I want to thank you personally for your patience during the regulatory approval process. I know the timeline has been longer than originally projected, but we're dealing with government bureaucracies that move at their own pace. The important thing is that we're making real progress, and your bank will be recognized as the visionary institution that made Nigeria's transformation possible. Every communication made Sakaguchi feel like a pioneer and visionary, a partner in something historically significant. The psychological reward of being part of such an important project became almost as addictive as the promised financial returns. To avoid detection at Banco Noroeste, Sakaguchi exploited a loophole in the bank's internal controls. Any international transfer under $6 million could be approved by the regional manager, meaning Sakaguchi himself, without board oversight. By keeping each transfer just under this threshold, Sakaguchi moved massive amounts of money without triggering his own bank's risk management systems. Over 36 months, dozens of transfers totaling $242 million flowed from Brazil to Emmanuel's network. The transfers were disguised with varying descriptions: infrastructure consulting, equipment procurement, legal services, environmental studies. Each had supporting documentation that appeared legitimate to anyone conducting a casual review. Sakaguchi even varied the receiving countries to avoid establishing obvious patterns. Some payments went to Nigerian government accounts in Switzerland. Others went to project consultants in London. Still others went to equipment suppliers in Hong Kong. By 1998, Emmanuel was living like a king. He owned mansions in Abuja, Lagos, London, and New York. He had invested millions in legitimate businesses across Africa and Europe. He traveled in private jets, dined at the world's finest restaurants, and commanded respect in Nigeria's highest social circles. Sakaguchi, meanwhile, was experiencing increasing anxiety. The airport project was now 3 years old, had consumed $242 million, but still hadn't broken ground on actual construction. Emmanuel's explanations were becoming increasingly elaborate. The environmental review process has revealed some complications that require additional geological studies. New European Union aviation regulations require us to modify our original terminal design. The Nigerian legislature is debating infrastructure taxation policies that could affect the project's financial structure. Each explanation was plausible, backed by official-looking documentation, and accompanied by assurances that construction would begin within the next 6 months. But Sakaguchi was running out of ways to explain the delays to himself. His confidence was cracking, though he couldn't bring himself to consider that the entire project might be fraudulent. The scam might have continued indefinitely if not for a completely unrelated corporate development. Spain's Banco Santander, one of Europe's largest financial institutions, had identified Banco Noroeste as an attractive acquisition target. The due diligence process for such acquisitions is exhaustive. Teams of auditors examine every aspect of the target bank's operations, assets, liabilities, and risk exposures. Nothing escapes scrutiny. When Santander's auditors began reviewing Noroeste's international transactions, they immediately noticed unusual patterns. Hundreds of millions in outgoing transfers to Nigeria, with no corresponding documentation about expected returns or risk assessments. Mr. Sakaguchi, the lead auditor, asked during a routine interview, "Can you explain these substantial transfers to Nigeria? They don't appear in your bank's official investment portfolio." That question began the unraveling of one of history's most sophisticated financial frauds. When confronted by Santander's auditors and Noroeste's board of directors, Sakaguchi initially responded with pride rather than shame. He believed he was about to reveal his masterstroke, a $250 million infrastructure investment that would generate hundreds of millions in returns. "Gentlemen," Sakaguchi began confidently, "I've been managing what may be the most profitable investment opportunity in our bank's history. We are the primary financing partner for Nigeria's new international airport in Abuja. The project is nearing completion, and our returns will be extraordinary." The silence in the room was deafening. "Mr. Sakaguchi," the board chairman finally said, "are you telling us that you've invested $242 million of depositor funds in a construction project that has never been reviewed or approved by this board?" For the first time in 3 years, Sakaguchi heard his own words from an outside perspective. The confidence in his voice began to waver. The project required absolute confidentiality, he explained. I was dealing directly with Nigeria's central bank governor. The opportunity was time-sensitive. As he spoke, Sakaguchi watched the expressions around the table shift from confusion to horror to anger. For the first time, he began to consider a possibility that his mind had refused to accept for 3 years. What if there was no airport? What followed was one of the most complex international fraud investigations in banking history. The money trail led investigators through 17 banks in 8 countries, each transfer carefully structured to avoid triggering regulatory reporting requirements. Brazilian authorities worked with Interpol, Swiss banking regulators, British financial crimes units, and eventually Nigerian government officials to trace the missing $242 million. The investigation consumed thousands of hours and cost millions of dollars. The complexity of Emmanuel's laundering system became clear as investigators discovered legitimate businesses, real estate investments, and legal financial transactions mixed throughout the money trail. This wasn't simply stolen money sitting in bank accounts. It had been integrated into the global financial system through dozens of legitimate-appearing business activities. When investigators finally identified Emmanuel Nwude as the mastermind, they discovered he wasn't hiding. He was living openly in Nigeria, running legitimate businesses, and maintaining his reputation as a successful entrepreneur. When first approached by Nigerian authorities, Emmanuel's response was characteristic: calm, confident, and carefully calculated. "Gentlemen, I believe there may be some misunderstanding about legitimate business relationships I've maintained with international partners. If there are questions about proper documentation of these activities, I'm certainly willing to cooperate with any reasonable inquiry." Even when confronted with evidence of the deception, Emmanuel maintained his composure. He had spent years preparing for this possibility and had constructed his defense as carefully as he had constructed his original fraud. Emmanuel's trial became a sensation in Nigerian media and attracted international attention from financial crime experts worldwide. The courtroom was packed daily with reporters, banking professionals, and curious observers trying to understand how such an elaborate deception had succeeded for so long. Emmanuel arrived in court each day wearing expensive suits, accompanied by a team of Nigeria's most skilled attorneys. He carried himself not like a criminal defendant but like a successful businessman dealing with an unfortunate misunderstanding. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Testimony from Sakaguchi, financial records from 17 banks, forged documents, fake photographs, recorded phone conversations, and evidence of the elaborate London meetings. But Emmanuel's defense was equally sophisticated. His attorneys argued that he had been facilitating legitimate business discussions between Nigerian government officials and international investors. Any misunderstandings about the scope or status of potential projects were the result of communication failures rather than criminal intent. Most audaciously, Emmanuel's team suggested that the real crime was Sakaguchi's failure to conduct proper due diligence before making massive investments without his own bank's authorization. As the trial progressed, evidence emerged of Emmanuel's attempts to corrupt the judicial process itself. Court officials reported receiving offers of substantial bribes. Jury members were approached with promises of financial rewards for favorable verdicts. The situation became so concerning that the presiding judge issued a public warning. This court will not tolerate any attempts to influence these proceedings through financial inducements. Any evidence of bribery attempts will result in additional criminal charges. The most dramatic moment came when a bomb threat forced evacuation of the courtroom. Although no explosive device was found, the incident highlighted the extraordinary lengths someone was willing to go to disrupt the proceedings. The trial's turning point came when prosecutors brought Nelson Sakaguchi to Nigeria to testify in person. The Brazilian banker entered the courtroom visibly uncomfortable, knowing that his testimony would seal Emmanuel's fate but also expose his own professional failures to international scrutiny. Sakaguchi's testimony was devastating in its detail. He described the 3-year relationship, produced hundreds of documents, played recorded phone conversations, and showed photographs from their London meetings. Most damaging was Sakaguchi's description of the psychological manipulation he had experienced. Mr. Nwude didn't just steal money, Sakaguchi testified. He created an entire false reality that I lived inside for 3 years. Every document, every photograph, every conversation was designed to reinforce my belief that I was participating in something legitimate and important. The sophistication of this deception is unlike anything I've encountered in 20 years of international banking. When Emmanuel saw Sakaguchi in the witness stand, he knew his elaborate defense was collapsing. Faced with overwhelming evidence and potential decades in prison, Emmanuel finally agreed to negotiate. His initial offer was to return $10 million in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecution's response was swift. Mr. Nwude, we will not accept anything less than $80 million in restitution plus substantial prison time. The negotiation continued for weeks, with Emmanuel's attorneys arguing that much of the money had been invested in legitimate businesses that couldn't be liquidated quickly. Emmanuel's final offer, $40 million in cash and property, claiming this represented everything he could access. The prosecution's final demand, $120 million plus $10 million in fines to the Nigerian government. Facing life in prison if convicted on all charges, Emmanuel accepted the deal. Emmanuel served less than 2 years of his 5-year sentence before being released on good behavior. Within months of his release, he was back in court, this time fighting to reclaim property he claimed the government had seized beyond their agreement. Remarkably, Emmanuel won several of these cases, recovering approximately $50 million in assets. According to investigators, through the same methods that had made him successful in the first place: carefully placed bribes and political connections. Nelson Sakaguchi served several years in Swiss prison for financial fraud and money laundering. Upon his release, he was permanently banned from the banking industry. Banco Noroeste was sold to Santander at a significant discount, with depositors ultimately bearing much of the financial loss. This story isn't just historical curiosity, it's a blueprint for understanding how sophisticated financial fraud operates in our digital age. Emmanuel's psychological techniques are now used in cryptocurrency scams, investment frauds, and romance scams that steal billions annually. The key elements remain constant: authority, claiming important positions or connections; urgency, creating time pressure to prevent careful consideration; or exclusivity, making victims feel specially chosen; gradual escalation, starting with small commitments and increasing slowly; social proof, referencing other victims or prestigious associations; sunk cost manipulation, making victims invest so much they can't walk away. In 2016, nearly 2 decades after his original crime, Emmanuel Nwude was arrested again. This time it wasn't for financial fraud, it was for murder. According to investigators, Emmanuel had become involved in a land dispute in Nigeria. When negotiations failed, he allegedly sent 200 armed followers to forcibly seize the disputed property. The confrontation resulted in 1 death and several serious injuries. This final chapter reveals the most chilling aspect of Emmanuel's character: his complete willingness to use any means necessary to achieve his goals, whether financial fraud, judicial corruption, or ultimately violence. The story of Emmanuel Nwude and the Phantom Airport represents more than just an incredible crime. It's a window into the dark psychology of expert manipulation and the universal human vulnerabilities that make such deceptions possible. In our age of instant communication and global financial markets, the opportunities for sophisticated fraud have multiplied exponentially. But so have our tools for detection and verification. The next time you encounter an investment opportunity that seems too good to be true, remember Nelson Sakaguchi, a smart, experienced professional who let greed and psychological manipulation override decades of banking expertise. The next time you feel pressured to make a quick financial decision, remember Emmanuel Nwude, a master manipulator who understood that urgency is the enemy of rational decision-making. And the next time you receive that email from someone claiming to need your help transferring millions of dollars, remember that somewhere in Nigeria, a man once sold an imaginary airport for $242 million and lived like a king for years before anyone discovered the truth. The greatest defense against fraud isn't intelligence or experience. It's skepticism, patience, and the courage to verify every claim, no matter how prestigious the source appears to be. Because in the end, Emmanuel Nwude's greatest weapon wasn't technology or connections or even criminal genius. It was the simple understanding that people will believe almost anything if you tell them what they desperately want to hear. What's the most unbelievable part of this story to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that reveal the fascinating psychology of human deception.